So this, as you all know, I think most of you have already attended some of our virtual field tours this year. So this is our 8th of 9 virtual field tours that we've hosted. And we are archiving all of these on our website, which Brad and Maricos will share there in the chat box. So if anybody that you know would like to attend or learn more about any of these topics, all of these will be archived on our website. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Lucas Niebert, who's been leading the corn breeding work, and he's going to share a bit about that and lots of beautiful pictures in this presentation. I'll hand it off to you, Lucas.
Thank you, Amy, and thank you all for coming to this week's virtual field day, and where we'll be talking all about dry farming corn. And thank you for answering the poll questions. We'll be going into some aspects, general aspects of corn breeding, and also talking specifically about dry farming corn. For those who haven't dry farmed corn before, corn actually, depending on variety, does lend itself pretty well to dry farming. And the plants don't get quite as big, but they can yield nearly as much as irrigated in some cases. The variety we're working most closely with on the left here, Open Oak Party Mix, that variety, we've had yields up to 90% of irrigated. And there are other benefits to dry farming corn, which would include the much superior weed control. You don't have to weed the corn as much, and also resistance to lodging because the plants aren't as big, and resistance to mold as well because the plants tend to dry down a little faster. And that's one aspect that we're exploring this year with not only the breeding project, but also a corn variety trial, which I'll get into in a little bit. So with the dry farming project, we've been experimenting with several corn varieties. We did most heavily 2017 through 2018, and we wrote up a little report on it. So you see the graph on the right side, just for the varieties we tested, we had the most replication on, and the orange colors are, each dot in this figure is a certain plot, a replicate plot. So the orange dots and the orange box and whisker plots are OSU research sites, and then the dry farming collaborative participant sites are in gray. But I just want to show that the Open Oak Party Mix, this dent corn variety, had been outperforming these other varieties, which happen to be flower corn varieties that they actually descended from Painted Mountain. So Papa's Red and Magic Manna, those varieties were descended from Painted Mountain, which is a northern variety that it doesn't get as big. Its drought strategy is to finish quickly, and this year we're actually growing a similar variety called Papa's Blue, which I'll get into in a minute. But dent corn, this variety tends to get bigger, and its yield kind of reflects that. But it's a balance. If the soil dries out, then the plant might really suffer, whereas the earlier season corn varieties would do better. Open Oak Party Mix is stewarded by Adaptive Seeds. Their farm name is Open Oak Farm, and it's called Party Mix because it's essentially a big admixture of many different corn varieties. A few New England Flint varieties were crossed and mixed into this a diversity of dent corn varieties that had come from a Wisconsin nutrition breeding project. And yeah, they're steering the corn variety such so that people could start selecting for certain traits suitable for our region and our foodways. So this is a panel of corn from 2018. The best ears we chose, and in addition to selecting for earliness and larger ears in dry farm conditions, we've been given a preference to more of the top of the panel, trying to bring out more of the orange dent varieties. And just real quick about breeding with corn. Corn or maize is a prolific outcrosser. It really likes to be planted with a lot of other maize plants, and it's susceptible to inbreeding depression. So, it's wind pollinated, so the pollen can get really far, and an individual ear can have many different paternal pollen donors. So, traditionally it's been open pollinated, and just by saving seed, you're actually, a, a plant breeder in a sense. And mass selection is the simplest way to do that, where you just save the best ears, for example, like we did last year or in 2018 with this panel. But yeah, and then also just to mention, a lot of the modern corn are hybrids in which two really, maladapted, in a sense, inbreds, corn that you wouldn't want to plant on their own, they are crossed to form a hybrid. And just by the nature of biology, it's called heteroesis, where when you cross two distinct corn varieties, then their offspring can be particularly vigorous. So modern corn breeding takes advantage of this. However, when you think about adaptation through time, it's hard to track changes in our ecology and biomes and climate through time using the hybrid model. And so open pollination seems to be a better approach. In addition to the fact that open pollination includes much greater genetic diversity, you can maintain a greater genetic diversity in your population as a safeguard for unknown future conditions. And then also certain traits like drought tolerance, very genetically complex. There's no one genetic combination that can afford a plant drought tolerance, for example. So we want to keep things in a relatively open pollinated breeding pattern when we're talking about stress tolerance like drought. And so this woman on the left is Dr. Jennifer Kling. She is a professor at OSU Crop and Soil Science, and she's been my mentor for this corn breeding project. And here she is sorting through hand-pollinated offspring that we produced. Well, I guess ears that were produced by hand pollination in 2019, and we did sort of a reciprocal cross in which we had two plants and they pollinate each other. So that's why you see two ears in general for each of these full sibling families. So we're trying to have a little more genetic control than just mass selection. So, for each little bag here with the two ears, all of those can be considered full siblings. They all have the same two parents. And so if you were to plant them out the next year, they would have a lot more in common than with each other genetically than, the ears next to them in the different full sibling family. And so what we're doing is a process called recurrent selection. where the outcome we want an open pollinated population. However, we want it to go a lot faster than just mass selection, because with mass selection, you might be picking the best ears each year, but there's an unknown amount of fathers with unknown genetics. You know, some of them might be disadvantageous, like you know, relatively poor genetics for your system. And so what we do is, by having this control, we then evaluate in year 2 the new breeding families that we created, and we save back the extra seed from year 1, and then we select the top, say 20% of the top performing 20% of the families, and then use those with our save back seed to create a new OP population. So it's kind of a 2-year cycle. And then in this 3rd year, you can also create new breeding families and start the cycle again. So 1 year you're creating new breeding families, the next year you're evaluating them in the fields. And that way you can continue to track, you know, changes in climate or, you know, biology in your system. And these numbers of 200 breeding families or top 20% of breeding families, those aren't hard and fixed, but it's a convention that we're using for this project. And so more details on the 2020 breeding evaluations. So we have 200 breeding lines, and we're evaluating both dry farmed and irrigated, so we can see the relative improvement or you know, relative yield loss you get with dry farmed on 2 different sites, OSU Vegetable Research Farm and the Soul Cycle Farm, which is a private farm in the area. This is a picture from Soul Cycle. This is a dibbler that allows precision planting, hand planting of seeds. We try to keep everything uniform in 10-inch to 12-inch row spacing. It ended up being 10-inch spacing at the OSU farm and 12-inch at Soul Cycle in row spacing, 30 inches between rows, with 2 replicate plots per irrigation regime per site. So that's effectively 800 treatments per site for a total of 1,600 treatments. So a lot of different plots. That's one aspect of recurrent selection, is your evaluations can take a lot of work in any given year, but it pays off because you are able to arrive at genetically superior population a lot faster than you would mass selection. So we're selecting for yield, earliness, and the so-called anthesis silking interval, which is basically the interval between when pollen starts to shed and when the silk starts to emerge from the corn plant. And this interval can be really important in determining drought tolerance. If the pollen is shed a lot earlier than the silk emerges, then it indicates the variety is drought stressed. Same with leaf death, like the lower leaves can start dying, and that can show an indication of drought tolerance. And at the end of the season, we'll be evaluating ear size and culinary quality. We would like to have more of the dent traits in this variety, and because those, which I'll get into in a little bit, are better for nixtamalization, so masa and posole. So these are 2 sites, OSU Vegetable Research Farm and the Soul Cycle Farm, and you can see the Vegetable Research Farm, or the veg farm, we have our evaluation plots are irrigated on the left and dry farmed on the right. You can see the dry farmed have a little less green, and you can pretty much make out that they're a little shorter in this picture. Soul Cycle Farm, this is a high up aerial drone image you could see the dry farmed on the top and irrigated below it. And on the left side, you could see some phylan issues, which yeah, add a little more complexity to our research, our analysis. So those are pictures from a drone. We actually, the Dry Farming Institute, the Dry Farming Project, formed a collaboration with the Watershed Professionals Network, in which we basically asked them to create some high resolution drone imagery. This was funded by the Western Extension Risk Management Education Program. And they use a sophisticated sensor called MicaSense Altum, which has, it can fly up to, from a distance of 50 meters, it can get a 5.2 centimeter resolution. So each pixel is 5.2 centimeters across. Not very, it's pretty precise. And then of these different wavelengths of blue, light, red, green, the red edge, and near infrared. And what that can do is you can use those measures to establish plant health, how well it's photosynthesizing, the chlorophyll levels. You can measure the temperature of the plots, and also you can even get at plant height from the air, which is really interesting. So on the right is just an example of one of the metrics, modified soil adjusted vegetation index. So we'll be able to use this aerial imagery to complement our on the ground assessment of these different varieties, or excuse me, these different breeding lines. So here's a short video where it's just a photo and video montage of the breeding project. Here we are planting in late May. You can see all the different plots. They're 20-foot row plots, 30 inches apart. Here we have emergence about a week later. In July 3rd, so this is about a month later. July 6th, not quite knee high, but doing well. And this is at Soul Cycle Farm. So I have a few pictures of this, and you see they have this rolling irrigation in the irrigated plot over there. Back at the veg farm. And as we go through these pictures and videos, you'll start to see, you'll note the differences between the different breeding families. It could be really stark how the different full sibling lines can look. And I'll have a few of these pictures as well, comparing the dry farm on the left and the irrigated on the right. And yeah, July 21st at the Vegetable Research Farm, we have some tassels starting to emerge on some of the breeding lines. Here you can see a notable difference in the vigor or the height of the plant between breeding lines. You're starting to see a difference between dry farm irrigated. And then if you look at the tassels, some plants are tasseling while others are not. So there's really quite a difference in the pollination window for these different varieties, different breeding lines. There's our drone landing after taking images at Soul Cycle. And you note that Soul Cycle the soil is more of a Dayton soil, so it has kind of a relatively hard pan, just a couple feet down. So the corn plants seem to be a little more stunted. Whereas at the vegetable research farm, the plants are able to get further down into the soil. So yeah, that was a 2 days prior at the veg farm, and then the same timing at Soul Cycle. The plants are a lot smaller in the dry farm section. And then here's our last picture for this slideshow about a week or two ago. And you can see that the ears are starting to dry down. And we have not yet harvested, but we're going to start harvesting next week. And we'll be measuring the ear moisture level as well. So we'll get a sense of which ones dry down faster than others. Because really, when we're talking about growing corn in the Pacific Northwest, we really want to be able to get it out of the fields as early into the fall as possible to avoid the rain and the mold associated with that. So the result of these evaluations will be that at the end of next year, we'll have a new variety. So we'll plant we'll plant the top 20% in the field, and they'll open pollinate, and then that will be available dry farm variety, drought tolerant corn variety. And trying to think of a name, I was thinking originally, because the kernels look like fire, I was thinking about the name being wildfire. That has a little sensitive connotations right now, but it really does look like fire. So shifting gears to another big corn project we're doing this year, which is masa corn variety trials with NOVIC, the Northern Organic Vegetable Improvement Collaborative. And to some extent, the Organic Seed Alliance, they're doing sort of a sister trial up in Washington State. And so the main aim of this project is to determine maize varieties most suitable for the Pacific Northwest grown masa and hominy posole. So in other words, most suitable for producing nixtamalized products, nixtamalized food. So in addition to our open oak party mix, which you see on this panel, we have these 11 other varieties, which I'll get into in a minute. So I just want to review what nixtamalization is. If you ever had a tamale, then you have, or you've had a tortilla, or you've had pozole, you've had a corn that has been nixtamalized. Tamale, that's the root of nixtamalization, so it's part of the etymology. So the traditional method of transforming corn, this was 3,500 years ago. In a lot of regions in Mexico, there's limestone, and so when grinding corn in limestone, people were actually nixtamalizing it already. It's essentially you're chemically cooking it in an alkaline solution, and in regions where there was not limestone, this was accomplished with wood ash, KOH, potassium hydroxide. And so in modern days, you can purchase lime pickling, like calcium carbonate as cal, or pickling lime. If there's a Latino food store, you can buy it as cal, or pickling lime is another name for it. And yeah, you just essentially boil the whole kernels, in the solution of lime for about half an hour to an hour, and then You let it soak overnight. In some corn varieties, you can take off the skin pretty easily after this process. In others, this one is actually Cascade Ruby Gold flint corn. The skin can stay on there, which is fine. It just adds a little more texture and flavor, in my opinion. And then you grind these kernels into a dough, and you can form the dough and create tortillas, for example, or tamales. If you want to just go with pozole, then you don't need to grind them. So um, in, in addition to allowing it to be more dough-like, it also increases the nutritional availability of certain vitamins in corn, including niacin, most famously. And I've been sort of casually mentioning the different corn types, but so we have flint corn, dent corn, and flour corn are the main basic sort of field corns that you can dry down. And you can think of as, yeah, flint is gritty. It has a lot of this sort of fatty, higher protein, more flavorful grit in there in the endosperm. And then flour, you open the kernel and it's just all starch. And dent is somewhere in between, where it has a, you know, flint could have like maybe 10 to 20% flour. Dent can have like 30 to 40% flour. So a little more flour. And the folks I've talked to and read about, it seems like, and with my own experience, it seems like dent corn is a pretty good balance of flavor and also texture, and it still binds the tortillas really well. So we trialed a lot of dent varieties this last year. And here they are. So just going across the top, we have, I kind of separated them into colors. We have Zulu dent, which was made available, which is available at Sandhill Preservation Center. It's relatively mid to late season. One of the issues, by the way, with, like I mentioned, with growing corn in the Pacific Northwest is you want it to be relatively early. The nights are cool, so and corn was not traditionally adapted to this region, so we're trying to find varieties that in particular can finish up more quickly. They're a little less than late season, although we did include some later season varieties. Excuse me. So Silver King Dent we got from Restoration Seeds in Southern Oregon, but it's still relatively late. It was our latest variety this year. Tuxana sweet corn. So you can nixtamalize all corn varieties, including sweet corn. So we want to include this one, which is used for elote. It has a tuxedo sweet genetics, but also Anasazi corn, which was traditionally, is more of a flour corn, and that was used, has been traditionally used as more like a not so sweet, but fresh eating corn. And that one was more mid-season. Then we have a couple yellow varieties. Knoth Steam Dent from Resilient Seeds up in Washington is the earliest season dent we found. It was one of our earlier finishing ones this year. And then Dublin Dent, which is little almost mid to late season, but it's large plants and high yielding. Then we have our mixtures of yellow, orange, and red of Open Oak Party Mix, Dent, and Cascade Ruby Gold Flint corn. So that's a Carol Deppy Fertile Valley seed variety. And that one is one of the earlier varieties that we grew this year. It's about 90 days here. Then we have Bloody Butcher Dent, which there's varieties, there's seed sources all over the place, but we sourced some from Idaho, so a more northern climate, and we found this year that it finished relatively mid-season, relatively earlier than it would have from a different seed source. And then also Northwestern Red Dent, on the right here. And that one was also relatively early season, was earlier than the Bloody Butcher for sure. Also from the Sandhill Preservation Center. A couple of blue varieties, Jerry Peterson flower. We included that because that was a taste test winner from the Organic Seed Alliance masa corn trials last year. This one is kind of on the later side. And so to compare, we decided to compare that with Papa's Blue flower, which is a descendant of Painted Mountain. So and it's more of a dwarf, very early corn variety. It started pollinating really quickly, and the plants are not very high off the ground. And then finally, we have a Oaxacan green dent, which you saw in that original picture, makes green tortillas. And there's the Three Sisters Nixtamal up in Portland is really interested in growing these, or producing green tortillas using this variety. Yeah, so that's the list. And our methods fairly similar to the evaluation, the breeding evaluation. So the plot sizes were a little bigger. We did, instead of 1 20-foot row, we did 4 20-foot rows in these kind of blocks. And you can kind of see the different blocks on this map of the different varieties. Some with better stands than others, some just bigger plants than others. 2 replicate plots per irrigation regime per site. And importantly, we hand pollinated about 100 ears of each variety. And this was relatively time consuming, but it ensured that their seeds would remain there, or maintain true to type. Their culinary quality would be true to type, and that we could also save seed for future years. And we measured similar drought tolerance measures as for the breeding evaluations of open up party mix. So I had a longer corn pollination video to show you, but it was just way too slow. And so that video will be available online. But I just wanted to talk a little bit about it right now. So on the left side, the left picture, we see a shoot, an emerging shoot where the ear is that is starting to develop, and the silks are gonna emerge from the sheath of leaves. And the key of the first key of corn pollination is to cover that shoot with shoot cover. You can see in this video, there's a shoot cover on this other silk. We want to cover that up as quickly as possible. You choose the highest, most silk because the top ear is going to be the dominant ear. And so this is a picture of the silks emerging, and each of these silks is going to capture pollen, and a single lucky pollen is going to grow. Pollen grain is going to grow a pollen tube down into the cob, and each silk will pollinate an individual seed. So the silks are essentially the female flower stigma. And so, yeah, here we are on pollination day, adding pollen to them. And we also have the male flower, our tassels, and you see it's shedding pollen right here. It sheds pollen most heavily in the morning, and then throughout the day, the pollen tends to die off in the heat. It gets too dry, it desiccates. And so we put the pollen bags up the day before. And if you tune into the video, you can see how we do that. But, and then we collect the pollen into the pollen bags in the morning. And what we're doing with our variety trial was we pooled a bunch of the pollen for each plot and then pollinated the sister replicate plot. So we completely avoided any inbreeding, and so we outcrossed it. and we just maintain the diversity that way as well by pollinating each plant with multiple pollen donors. That's so here we are. This is Jennifer Kling. This was our first breeding day, hand pollinating day with Hopi Blue, which is Papa's Blue, which you can see is very small, short corn. We're bending over to pollinate that in this picture, in this video. And one thing I didn't mention, which is more clear in our complete pollination video, is it's helpful to cut the shoots a day or two before you pollinate. That way, in the pollen, the silks keep on growing after you cut them. And so when it comes to pollination, the silks are this sort of more uniform brush pattern, and that allows for all the pollen grains to get where they need to go, and yeah, more uniform coverage on the ear. So here's what the Papa's Blue looked like after we, when we were ready to pollinate them that morning. We had put the pollen bags up, and yeah, as you can see, the plants are, 3 feet high tops. They're producing ears just inches off the ground. So this is one strategy for dry farming, and this variety, it comes from Painted Mountain, which is a collection of northern Midwest varieties like Dakotas and Montana, where there is a really short growing season. And so we can use this. It won't yield as much, but you'll have the security of knowing it'll wrap up really quickly. And indeed, we planted kind of late this season, but we've already harvested this variety. Yeah, this is me advertising the corn pollination demo video. It's fairly amateur, and you can see we have a bungeed a GoPro to me, so we can get some up close and personal corn shots. But that video will be available at the link online at the link that we shared in the chat box. Here's a picture just demonstrating the diversity of the different varieties we have in the field. This giant, 12, 14-foot variety is Silver King, which just kept growing and growing before it finally started pollinating about 3 weeks ago. Here's some irrigated Papa's Blue next to these other more mid-season corn varieties. And yeah, I'll wrap up this session, or this part of the session, with just kind of a field tour from last week in the smoke. I went in and just sort of gave a snapshot of where everything was, and you can see how the different varieties look in the fields. Let's try to start that.
Lewis Brown Farm. This is September 17th, and we have here the dry farmed corn variety trials. In addition to some breeding material up here in front, we have Dakota black popcorn starting to dry down fairly well.
So yeah, we're doing actually some
dry, maybe 30% moisture, something like
with
that.
Dakota Black. We're starting some new breeding families, full stud breeding families for evaluating next year. And that's a popcorn.
Here's a plot of Zulu.
That was a white
This is
corn.
one of the later varieties, pollinated on 818. Really big ears, but certainly not ready yet to harvest. We got Bloody Butcher variety
I guess the video is lagging behind the
right
sound.
here.
So I'm going to turn off the video, or sorry, turn off the sound. So yeah, there's the Zulu variety. Yeah, that one's a little later. Yeah, and there's Bloody Butcher. It's kind of just a corn maze. There's Bloody Butcher, yeah. So yeah, with the seed source we have, it's almost ready. It's basically ready right now, which it's a lot earlier than other seed sources of Bloody Butcher. Again, that's the Snake River Seed Cooperative in Idaho. And then we have our Nostine dent right here, which they're relatively small plants, especially dry farmed in this plot. And that one is about ready for harvest. And you can see it's pretty uniform, just small single stalks, usually just one ear per stalk. So you could pack a lot of them in there with a little tighter spacing. And it's all yellow corn variety. And then right here we have our Papa's Blue. And it's certainly a dwarf corn, very small. It's definitely more vulnerable to ground critters like raccoons. And we harvested that just this week. That one is Northwest Red, which is relatively, oh sorry, that was Cascade Ruby Gold. Relatively early season, smaller plants, and that was the flint corn. And this one's the Oaxacan green, which is still looking pretty green. I think we're looking at Northwest Red right here. Yeah, and that's about ready to harvest too. These plants, yeah, had a few tillers and multiple ears. More of that kind of growth habit than single ear per stalk. This is a plot of Texana, and it had we didn't get very good germination on it, but this was produced by the late Jonathan Sparrow, passed away this year. And these are particular seeds that he provided us that were larger, so potentially better for nixtamalizing. That looks like, I think that one's Dublin dent, which is larger plants higher up, and that'll be high yielding if it can mature in time. I think we got one more. That one is Jerry Peterson Blue, I believe. Actually, that might have still been Dublin. Sorry. Yeah, so this last one here is going to be Jerry Peterson Blue. And this one forms a lot of tillers. So you need, yeah, they're more bush-like in a sense. You need a lot of different, well, yeah, they'll have a lot of different years per plant. So yeah, that's the walkthrough for the variety trial project, and yeah, we'll be harvesting that as the plants can dry down. And so I've already alluded to this. The output of these variety trials will be culinary evaluations and seeds. And Three Sisters Nixtamal in Portland, you should check them out if you haven't heard about them. They're interested in trialing all these varieties, and they use they're fairly mechanized, and they find that the Flint varieties are kind of sticky, and so they kind of gum up their machine, and they have to add varieties that have more flour. So I'm sure that'll be the case for the sweet and the Flint corn varieties, that they just won't scale up. But that's not to say that they aren't good varieties for nixtamalizing. There's also, small scale, home style or small business production. So we are still looking to engage with smaller scale chefs and cooks. And then also, we're looking forward to future trials. And we did select for the earlier plants in each variety when we hand pollinated. So this is one way that we can start introducing these varieties more to this region and trying to push them a little earlier. And that's my son Cassidy. We were harvesting some Papa's Blue yesterday. And with that, I can take any questions you have. Thanks for listening.
Thank you so much, Lucas. Before we get into the Q&A, I just wanted to mention that we do have one more field tour coming up next week, September 30th. And this one is going to be our harvest showcase, just featuring some of our standout varieties. I know anyone who registered for our virtual field tours received an email, and there's a registration link that Maricos or Brad, if you could go ahead and share that. We have boxes available. We're putting together pretty good sized boxes of all of some of the varieties that we've grown this year. And we're going to be selling those, and 50% of the money that comes from that will be going to wildfire relief, folks that have been affected by the wildfires. And then the other part will go to covering our seed costs. Maricos just shared the link for that box, for purchasing a box in the chat box there. So we will be taking orders until the end of the day today. We were going to stop at noon, but we're going to go ahead and extend it until 5 o'clock. And we have 3 pickup spots, Corvallis, Monroe, and Albany. So if you're, well, like Carolina, you're pretty far away. We aren't going to be able to get you a box, but if you're located kind of in the Willamette Valley area and want to sign up for a box, that link there will help you do so. And with that, Maricos and Brad, you're on here with us, and you're co-producing this last field tour with Cassandra. Is there anything else you'd like to mention about that before we go to Q&A?
When you register, you should get an email with some kind of some prompts about a couple of things to think about and be ready to share, because it's an interactive field tour where your inputs will kind of make it successful. So please do, a couple minutes of homework or contemplation and come prepared to share.
Great, thank you, Maricos. Yeah, a lot of these field tours, or all of them thus far, have really kind of been, we've had interaction in the chat box, but there's going to be breakout rooms, like Maricos was saying, in there. They've designed some questions to facilitate those discussions. So I hope you'll be able to join us for that. And so with that, maybe we can go ahead and go to Q&A. Brad and Maricos, could you go ahead and in the order that they came in, address those questions? I've got to step away for just a moment and I'll be right back.
We had a question from Carolina earliest that said, on a spike of many colors, as in a photo that she attached, if she selects only one of those colors and plants it, how long will it take to get a spike that is just that color? Like, how do you isolate for a color basically from a multicolor ear of corn?
Yeah, that's a good question, and it definitely has to do with the color and the dominance. And I am not totally read up on all of those details, but I can tell you that, you know, the color, each corn seed has different layers, and those layers can be different colors. And so if it's and they're either expressed by the mother or the father pollen donor. So the mother corn, typically those colors will be, you'll have it either white or yellow, and then on top of that, it can be a pericarp of red or orange, or yellow. So like red or orange can cover up the yellow, and that is expressed through the whole ear. And then there's a bunch of more colors. There's rainbow corn out there, and I have no idea how how all of those are expressed. The blue and purple and green, those colors come in through the pollen. So they're expressed via the pollen genes. And so if you see a modeling of, you know, some blue and some not blue, you know, the blue ones on the ear are, you know, those are from a pollen donor that had, you know, the blue gene. So yeah, it's a very context dependent question. It really depends on which colors, and I guess I would just recommend to look it up and look through the literature. And yeah, I might try to answer that question. What we're gonna do is we're gonna post these videos online, and this field day is gonna have its own sort of web page, and so I'll put additional resources on breeding for different colors. But I guess the other thing I want to mention is there's some dominant colors and some recessive colors, and so, you know, some colors you think you'll weed it out because maybe they're being dominated by another color, but then they'll come back again. So yeah, it's definitely a challenge.
There was another question about insect control. So they were wondering what we were doing for that.
Yeah, we are breeding for organic systems, and in the Willamette Valley, we do get some earworm, some Lepidoptera and earworm damage, and then we are also getting some root damage, we think, from the striped cucumber beetle. They can get at the roots as in the larval stage, so we're seeing some lodging. So I guess my only answer to that is, you know, trialing a lot of diverse varieties and, you know, selecting the ones that do better. Good husk coverage is one way to mitigate the predation on ears by insects. Good rooting vigor would be another good one. But other than just sort of selecting, we aren't using any like integrated pest management at this point, although I would recommend that on your farms, even adding, you know, hedgerows with pollinator species, for example.
Another question was from Victoria, and she was asking, what was the earliest we seeded the corn?
Yeah, that's a good question. So in the Pacific Northwest, it's kind of a balance. The soil, the spring, the rains come with cool weather, and so you want to plant when the soil is wet, especially in dry farm conditions. But also, it might still be too cool for germination, or for a successful stand. And this year, we generally planted pretty late because we had trouble prepping the soil enough between rainstorms, or weeks of rain. So the earliest we planted this year was the last week of May. However, in my own garden, I planted in late April and had reduced germination, but it worked out okay. So if you can prep the soil and be on top of it early in the spring and use varieties that have good cool weather performance, then you can get them in pretty early. I would like to, maybe in the next round of breeding evaluations for the open up party mix, I would like to do an early planting, because I think that is one of the more important aspects of having a good crop. Yeah.
There was a question asking, what are some varieties that have good cool weather germination?
Yeah, I would say the Cascade Ruby Gold Flint corn has particularly good cool weather germination. Generally, sweet corns don't do as well because they don't have as much of an endosperm that the embryo can feed on. So they depend on more heat for their vigor. And I imagine, although I haven't tested this, that the northern varieties of corn, like the Painted Mountain and all the different varieties that have been created out of Painted Mountain, so like Papa's Blue or Magic Manna from Carol Deppy, I suspect those would be pretty good early season varieties. I think a lot of flint corn varieties have this capacity, and I think it's the dent corn varieties where it's kind of unknown, and it would be good to test that some more. Flour corn varieties also, I think, in addition to flint, can have some good early season performance.
Someone was asking, do you have information on transplants instead of direct seeding?
We have, as far as I know, the dry farming group, we've done just direct seeding, and I think it's a better idea when you're dry farming to direct seed the large seeded crops in particular, because yeah, you can direct seed the large seeded crops, and then the roots just form a lot better. You don't have issues with, being root bound. So you take full advantage of the root vigor early on. So yeah, personally, I have done very little transplanting, and so I'm sure OSU Extension has some information out there about using transplants versus direct seeding of corn.
Do you think that transplanting would be a good way, or do you think transplanting would be a good way to go through managing dry farming, or do you think the direct seeding is the best way to achieve good high yielding results with dry
I could
farming?
see, yeah, I could see transplanting as being a way to, get these later season varieties to mature faster, you can, you can plant into moist soil some more easily, and you don't have to count on the surface of the soil being really wet or a rain event necessarily. You could plant into the moisture, kind of like you would when you're dry farming tomatoes, I imagine. But yeah, again, out of my expertise, but it seems like an interesting area to research more. And it depends on the scale of your corn plot as well.
Carolina mentions here that there are big birds down there in Brazil that eat the seedlings if she direct seeds them. So they always transplant, but she's not necessarily dry farming them. She said they go well and transplant, but it's more costly. And I know there's quite a few farmers in our area that will seed their sweet corn in flats and then transplant them out. And I think that, organic sweet corn, they can get a pretty good price for. So they may be able to make economic sense of it. So yeah, I think Lucas was mentioning before, like kind of that soil temperature, soil moisture balance. And if you're impatient like me, I usually plant too early to get good germ on the big seeded crops. So I have planted backups in the greenhouse to fill in where they don't germinate well. So yeah, I think that there's trade-offs, but yeah, if it could make economic sense, like with organic sweet corn, I think more folks do that, but that's irrigated. But all the growers I know that do irrigated sweet corn transplanted, they get a pretty good price for it.
Right. Yeah, that would be a really interesting study in transplanting dry farm corn. Yeah, in regards to the bird predation, one thing we've done, we didn't do this year because we had a huge area planted, but floating row cover, if you put that over your seeds or over your seeds, it improves germination in general because it maintains moisture and temperature better. You have a really good vigorous germination, and also protects from bird predation. Those fabric row covers. Or you could use a shotgun, like plant breeder Carol Deppy. But
yeah, the row cover makes a lot of sense for small plots, and Carolina works mostly on small plots. And yeah, I haven't seen any large scale farms go out on 100 acres and put row cover out. But for a lot of the small producers, like a lot of the folks that work with us, the row cover makes a lot of sense. And you don't have to, yeah.
Yeah, you can have it on there for like three to 4 weeks. The plants bend over a little bit, but then they correct themselves. More questions?
Yeah, we'll give another minute to see if there's any last questions. And in the chat box, I entered a link for the evaluation, and we'd really appreciate your feedback. It's really important for us so we can improve these in the future, but also for our funders. They like to know how these were received and if they were beneficial and if you've changed anything as a result of these. Excuse me. Okay, I don't see any. Oh wait, there is another question from Carolina. Brad, will you read it? I gotta get a drink. I got something in my throat.
Yeah, and she was asking, what about the distancing on the fields? When trying different varieties so they don't naturally cross, what would be a safe distancing?
Yeah, that's, the pollen can travel really far. So it depends on if you're okay with a little bit of pollen getting there or not at all. So what they say is 1 mile, 1 or even 2 miles is a distance. So, at least, 1 to 3 kilometers. So that's quite a distance. You can also create distance, of course, by staggering varieties, like the timing. So the pollination window is like 1 to 2 weeks. And so if you can, you know, plant one variety like 3 weeks later, or you plant one early variety and one late variety, then you can also achieve isolation that way. But yeah, the distance, you know, it can be reduced if, you know, there's hedgerows or some other landmarks in between the corn plots, but it's fairly long distance.
All right. It looks like, Brad, does it look like we've answered all the questions there? I know I've accidentally missed some in the past.
There was just the one that you had asked Lucas about his experience with corn. Like he's been working with it for a few years, and how Lucas ended up in it.
Yeah, why you chose corn, Lucas, because you have diligently been working with it for quite a few years. I think that'd be interesting to hear about.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, I guess I started working with corn during my grad school studies, and I was actually more focused on the the microbiome of plants, and I was interested in looking at it in one of many crop types. And I think corn was most interesting to me because I'm generally interested in staple crops, and when we think of staple cereal crops, for example, a lot of them require more mechanization. You know, like wheat. You know, when you're harvesting and then post processing and all that stuff. And corn is more of a, you can do it sort of more on a homestead scale, and you don't need to specialize as much. Like indeed, there can be small scale wheat farmers and stuff, but I feel like corn is more accessible to more people for that reason. And then also um, it's just an incredible crop. You know, it's a giant grass. It has stunning diversity and really great history. And yeah, I just hope to make it more available and for culinary use in our region as well.
Awesome. Well, I think that was a great way to kind of close our virtual field tour. Thank you so much, Lucas. There's a lot of thank yous in the chat box. Folks learned a lot. And we will hopefully see many of you next week at our last virtual field tour of the year. And have a great day. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.